and have some learnings and takeaways from this session. Before we begin today's event, I would like to start with a quick introduction on Xeno. Xeno was founded in 2002 and is a global management and strategy consulting firm with presence across the globe in Santa Clara, Houston, Bangalore, Gurgaon, and Paris. Over the past 18 years, Xeno has successfully consulted with over 250 plus Fortune 500 enterprises and large and mid-market private equity funds to develop actionable insights that help them create value across dimensions of both revenue and optimization. Our core expertise lies in product engineering, digital transformation, innovation, and outsourcing advisory, and we work with a diverse set of product and services companies in these areas. Xeno enables global companies to develop and optimize a global engineering footprint through center setups and technology and functional accelerators to achieve higher R&D efficiencies, innovation, and productivity. We also help global companies outline and drive or execute their open innovation programs, design and operate accelerator programs, and enable collaboration with startups across specific use cases and predefined outcomes. We work with enterprises too in structuring and implementing their digital transformation programs through levers such as AI/ML, cloud, IoT, and RPA. Finally, Zinnov also advises global private equity firms in asset shortlisting and target evaluation and commercial due diligence. Also, I would like to take this opportunity to invite you all to our flagship conference, Zinnov Confluence, scheduled in the last week of July. Some of you would have witnessed the growth of Confluence in its physical format over the years, but as dictated by the times that we are currently living in, Zinnov Confluence will be an online event this year, spread over 5 days and multiple sessions. Over the last 13 years, Xeno Conference has become the place for global technology and business leaders passionate enough and driven enough to make a difference in the ecosystem. A technology thought leadership summit, Confluence has become synonymous with change in the global R&D and product development space. This year's theme is anti-fragility. Over the past few months, we have all heard or used the word resilience in our day-to-day life, which means the ability to withstand something dramatic, or in our case, our black swan event of a lifetime, the COVID-19. This year at our flagship event, we are moving beyond resilience to focus on anti-fragility. With anti-fragility, we not only resist and recover, but we also get better. We believe that India as an ecosystem has the necessary ingredients for building anti-fragility, where we as a community come out from crisis not just strong, but stronger to a point where we thrive in the chaos. You can have a look at the various tracks mentioned on the page and register for sessions that are of interest to you. You can visit our website confluence.zinnov.com or write to us at events@zinnov.com. All right, getting back to the session and the agenda for today. We will start with a short keynote on ITC Infotech's automation journey, which will be followed by a panel discussion on building a post-pandemic playbook for automation. You can keep sending your questions throughout the session and we'll take them up either during the discussion or during a dedicated slot for Q&A, which we have provisioned towards the end. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce Sandeep Kumar, who will be kickstarting things for the day with an opening keynote. Sandeep is a Senior Vice President and leads Global Consulting at ITC Infotech. Sandeep has a rich blend of about 25 years of management consulting and operations experience. For the last 8 years, he has been instrumental in building and growing the consulting business for ITC Infotech, as well as incubation of new service lines such as supply chain management, business analytics, and automation. He also serves as a client partner for one of the ITC Infotech strategic accounts. Prior to ITC Infotech, Sandeep was at Infosys, where he executed multiple consulting leadership roles that included APAC consulting head for the manufacturing vertical, business consulting head for emerging markets, and Infosys domain consulting leader for manufacturing and supply chain. He is an alumnus of NIT Rourkela and IIM Bangalore. Over to you, Sandeep.
Thank you, Nikhil. So, a very good afternoon to everyone who basically come on to this particular call. Really appreciate your time and your interest in this. What I just wanted to talk to kick off this particular agenda today is a little bit about the journey that we in ITC Infotech have been taking in automation. And there are a few takeouts that I just wanted to probably bring to this forum and probably share with them. So when we started this journey, like most of the companies, strategic cost management, strategic cost reduction was really the key thing that we all kind of thought through and said, okay, automation is our answer to basically helping cut down the overall business process management cost. Very soon as we started moving this forward, we realized that, when you take, let's say, mid-sized companies or companies which are very federated in the way they're structured, the traditional business case for cost reduction, which is linked to a process, number of people who are really executing the process, and hence FT reduction or FT cost avoidance, typically tends to fall a little flat. Right? So I think one of the things that we really got challenged on was this entire aspect of, how should we really be looking at automation? Should we really look at it only from a perspective of steady cost management, or should we also start thinking of other pieces, other, let's say, areas as well? We also have the opportunity to work with, the ITC group of companies, which is, of course, you know, uh, our parent and also a very esteemed customer. We ran a bunch of discussions with them. We ran a bunch of discussions internally. What we really found was very interesting. We found that the case for automation today is probably really hinging on three different, factors. The first factor, of course, is, how do I really basically drive efficiency and productivity, if you may, in whatever that we do. Almost like, what Lean did, right? A long time back in the manufacturing sectors, and of course across various companies as well, various industries as well. So people obviously want to look at, automation as a lever to basically get your strategic um, process costs down. What we also found is that, when we started looking at, discussing with various stakeholders, various people across the organization, across hierarchies, the one thing that came out is that, people started talking about automation as, something that could potentially also help right set the work-life balance part of it for every individual, right? And therein, I think one of the things that we realized is that, there are so many different, roles that we have today in all our organizations. And one thing that really characterizes all these roles is the fact that there's a lot of monotony, there's a lot of, let's say, repetitiveness in terms of, many of these roles. To give you an example, a typical supply chain planner, which is supposed to be more of a decision-making, planning kind of, job description, typically has a lot more of the work activity focused around really data collection, data reporting, and things like that. And this is very, very standard, right? And this is, something that we found that, kind of cuts across. So we said that, hey, look, can we really change the axis and basically look at it from a role perspective? So can we right size a particular role by using automation as a lever? And hence, the concept of how do we really augment human potential started coming in as a very key construct for us. So we have started talking about, how do we really create a digital workforce where you have humans and we have basically digital assistants who can actually help you do your job better, take off a lot of the monotony from your tasks and work, and then basically, try and right size the work as well. As one of, as Milan from Automation Anywhere would say, this is really about, making work human as well, right? And so on. I think the other aspect that we also started thinking through was, does automation also help you make your entire processes more effective, right? And if you look at the effectiveness part of it, obviously, what you do with automation is you basically speed up the entire process. You start, basically looking at faster TAT, faster cycle times, faster alerting and monitoring, faster actions that you can really take. So there's an effectiveness dimension that also kicks in into the entire play as well. So essentially, one of the things that we said is that, when we start looking at automation, we should really be looking at it from three different perspectives. There should be the efficiency perspective, there should be the effectiveness perspective, and there should also be the experience perspective, which is really linked to, how do I really make this role a lot more meaningful for the employee and, take out a lot of gratitude from that as well. So that is one insight that I did want to basically share, in this particular forum. I think the other insight is totally more driven by, the current situation on COVID and COVID-19. So what we're really finding as a consequence of that is that people have started looking at automation in many different ways, right? So, is automation something that can help you create a lot more business resiliency? Can it really drive a faster, revival of your business as you basically go through this particular dynamic of the COVID-19 situation? How quickly can you really recover and then basically bounce back? So I think one of the things that we are seeing very interestingly is there's a lot of interest in terms of, how do we really use automation from a business contingency and continuity planning perspective, and also from a perspective of building in resiliency. So one of the things that we are noting is that if you have an automation capability which is already inbuilt, your ability to really withstand the kind of shocks that you really see as a part of, the external macro shocks like the COVID-19 and so on and so forth, that tends to basically become something that is far easily managed than what you would do without it, right? And last but not the least, I think one of the other things that we are also seeing very clearly is there is always this concept of automation being, in some sense, a leader to what many people are calling as technology debt, right? And there was always this allegation that was being pointed towards automation, that is it really from an IT systems perspective more of a band-aid treatment? I think the very interesting piece that we're also seeing here with many of our client conversations is that it is no longer being seen, from a perspective of how do you really run a very short intervention, but rather something which can really help you extend the useful life cycle of your application and create value within and outside of that as well. So these are probably the 2 or 3 very, very critical learnings that we have had. And I think, the more we go, I think the more we find that there are new possibilities that emerge with automation. So it is really a journey of discovery in my particular opinion. So I'll just probably end here and probably hand over back to Nikhil so that we can get the panel going. Thanks, Nikhil.
Thank you so much, Sandeep, for those insights and taking us through the journey of ITC Infotech and how ITC Infotech is looking at automation. That is very interesting to know. I would like to now introduce the other panelists for the session today. Joining Sandeep on the panel, we have Milan Sheth. Milan is a seasoned professional with more than 20 years of experience in advising the boards of leading public companies in digital services, technology-enabled business transformation, and functional transformations. As an executive vice president for the IMEA region, he is responsible for strengthening of the world-class talent pool, expanding our partner ecosystem, and delivering business outcomes for customers. Before joining Automation Anywhere, Milan served as a senior partner and national director for technology business at EY, Ernst & Young, for over 18 years. In his last role, he was managing partner of technology, media and entertainment, and telecommunications consulting business. He was also a global co-lead for the company's intelligent automation practice and managed client service in the emerging market geography. Also, an interesting thing to know about Milan. Milan has been practicing yoga for more than a decade and seeks to achieve inner peace without diluting ambitious life goals. Joining them for the session chair for today is Praveen Bharada. Praveen is a managing partner at Xeno and responsible for driving the digital transformation vision for the world's leading software platform companies, technology service providers, and end user organizations. Praveen is also leading company-wide efforts on pre-deal prospecting, due diligence, and post-deal growth strategy for private equity clients focused on technology investments. In his 13 years of professional experience, Praveen has spearheaded various market expansion and advisory projects for Fortune 500 technology companies across the world. He is also focused on expanding Xeno's business in key technology areas of IoT, intelligent automation or RPA, cognitive computing or AI, and cloud. With that, over to you, Praveen, for the session.
Yeah. Thank you, Nikhil. Hi, Milan. Hi, Sandeep. Really glad to be here on the panel with you, and thanks for taking all the time, and thanks ITC for giving us the opportunity to run this panel. I'm super excited about this topic. This is an area that we have been tracking at Xeno for a number of years now, and this is one of the most fascinating industries to say the least, right? If you look at the overall market size of roughly about $4.5 billion that's already spent in this industry, and the growth projections are even more interesting, right? Over the next 5 years, the market is likely to spend over $45 billion in what has come to be known as intelligent automation or hyper intelligent automation, right? Now, just to, before we get into the panel and learn from both of you in terms of your own journeys and experiences, I thought it'll be prudent for us to level set the context for a lot of people who have joined us today in terms of what do we really mean by hyper intelligent automation, right? And in a nutshell, it's really a philosophy which takes in consideration 4 critical components, if you will. The first one is really, of course, RPA, which is at the core of everything that we're going to talk about today. It's all about, it started with all about, automating mundane, repeatable, manual processes using a software bot. And over the years, with the infusion of AI, this has really become a lot more intelligent. It has started traversing beyond BPO workloads to IT workloads and workflow automations and whatnot, right? Supporting RPA are three other building blocks, which is really, the first one, of course, is the use case discovery, which is all about, which are the right kind of use cases should enterprise go after, right? And can enterprises become a lot more scientific in identifying those kind of use cases, be it in terms of analyzing user clicks or looking at data from enterprise applications. The idea here is to truly identify use cases that can maximize the value enterprises can get from automation. Following use case discovery is the next step, which is intelligent document processing. What happens is in use case discovery, a lot of unstructured processes are thrown out. And this is where IDP or document processing really enables data to be converted or unstructured data to be converted in a machine readable format and get it ready for further automation initiatives, right? Somewhere in between, and this has been a phenomenon that's been recently picked up, is also the construct of rethinking, reimagining the business process itself so that the values of automation can further be maximized, right? So in totality, it's really this philosophy which combines these three or four things together with the ultimate approach of, like Sandeep said, with the ultimate approach of enabling efficiencies, effectiveness, and experiences of the automation initiatives that companies are really going after, right? So this is the, when I say $45 billion of investment, we are looking at these, four building blocks of automation. And in the COVID times, this has become a lot more interesting. And this is where we're going to spend a bulk of our time today on the panel to really understand what are the new opportunities, new possibilities that have come up because of the pandemic situation. But before we do that, right? I just wanted to start on a lighter note. I've known Milan for a number of years now. Milan, you've had a fairly successful career, right? Any consultant would want to look at your trajectory and plan their career like that, right? In a consulting role. You spent roughly about 20 years doing that, right? What made you think of software industry and more specifically, automation back in the days when hardly anyone knew about it, right? There were a lot of confusion in terms of what this technology is all about and so on, right? Why did you make a decision of leaving a very successful career to coming to an industry which is probably not very well understood in the first place? So what was the motivation behind jumping the ship to this world?
Yeah, so first of all, Praveen, thanks for having me and joining Sandeep today. So thanks for inviting me to be part of this conversation. Well, I think the answer is very straightforward. 2013, General Electric and Honeywell made a statement that everything in the world will be technology. So where software will be at the heart of even manufacturing and so on. So I think there is that always element of technology changing the traditional industries which we've always known. I think other than ERP, there's nothing which has come in last 20 years which automated. So for me personally, one of the biggest trigger was the so-called AI. The steps of AI starts with RPA, cognitive, some of the stuff which you touched on earlier. So I wanted to be part of that this wave which is going to be there in next 8-10 years. And I think the second thing also I feel is that I've done enough consulting where I used to advise customers what to do. I said I might as well, drink my own Kool-Aid and execute some of the advice I had given to a lot of software companies. So yeah, those are the two reasons. And yeah, so far so good. Learning a lot and enjoying the journey, with our customers and with our partners.
Great. So while you're enjoying the journey, were there any myths that were broken? You thought that the industry would be like that, and you were surprised because the industry turned out to be very different.
I think one, well, I wouldn't say it's a myth, but I think one of the things which all of us who have been not involved in a software industry, when they walk into the industry, realize that the software industry always believes that they've answered or they have addressed all of the business challenges and business nuances. So to me, that bridge is what is generally missing in software. Somebody who understands process, industry, domain, and how do you take that technology and apply it. I think that is what I knew even earlier before I joined, and it has come back and it has reinforced my belief that there is a phenomenal software is available. I think what it requires is the fantastic practitioners who understand both domain and a process, and who understand technology and marry the two. It's changing in few companies, but still at large, software is a little bit of a devoid of the day-to-day problems of life, and that's where folks like you and folks like Sandeep and others play a big role in making that bridge happen and take it to the end customers and deliver that value which software promises.
Excellent. So let's just hold on to that thought, and we'll come back and reflect a little bit more on that. But I want to go to Sandeep with a similar lighter question. Sandeep, your industry has been about 30, 35 years old, largely built around people-centric business models. You put in more people and the revenues, magically grow, right? And then there's automation, which is all about, at least a lot of consultants and analysts believe that will end up reducing jobs to a certain extent, right? Why would you as a company focus on a cannibalizing trend, right? Which is something that would put pressure on the existing revenue streams that you have. What is so compelling about this technology that you as a company and the parent organization overall is prioritizing this market trend at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question, Praveen. The way at least I see automation is that automation is probably just about touch the tip of the iceberg, right, in terms of what automation can do. And to me, I think automation represents the kind of transformational change that every company will actually embrace, and we are seeing very clearly a lot of, let's say, data points to support that. So I always basically tend to equate it with a lean revolution, right, in terms of a management philosophy. I think that's the way I see the automation piece going. I think the question is not going to be in terms of will people actually adopt and basically embrace automation, right? It is really going to be a function of when, as opposed to how, and so on and so forth. I think that is one thing that one needs to really keep in mind. And going back to your question on from a technology services perspective, right, which is a very people-intensive business. I think cannibalization is going to be there, whether we like it or whether we don't like it, right? So it is inevitable, right? It's like the Darwin's law of evolution for me, right? So I think you have to get ahead of the curve in terms of looking at the possibilities that automation gives you, and then really drive it from there. Also, I think if you really look at it from a company of our size and a company like ITC Infotech, which probably hasn't really grown up the same trajectory as the larger IT service companies in India, which have basically gone down the global development model, ODCs, right? Large ERP programs, large SI programs, and so on and so forth. So they have basically ridden that wave, right? But for the guys who basically haven't gone down that path, I think this is an excellent opportunity for them to see whether they could actually right set, the entire model, right? So to that extent, I think it also gives us a chance to probably go in and probably do a rebaselining of IT cost operations, right? For our clients in a certain way, using automation as obviously a very, very strong lever, right? I think there's a competitive angle to it as well that I think we need to probably keep in mind. I think to put it very simply, I think I think the way this is moving today, right? And what we are really finding is that wherever you kind of look under the hood, right? There's an opportunity out there, right? So can you basically, for example, take an application through its entire implementation cycle and use automation to fast track that? Yes, you can. Can you basically fast forward the testing cycle, right, and make it a lot more, let's say, a lot more faster? At the same time, a lot better as well, right? Because when you look at, let's say, the manual testing and other testing models, they probably are susceptible to the human tendencies as well, right? So another way to look at automation could be that if you have a certain role under which you've got, let's say, 30 people working to that role, automation actually allows you to take the level of performance baseline up, right, and make it a lot more uniform. So I think there are factors like that which I think will definitely push this entire thing forward in a very, very significant way. I think that's the way I kind of read this.
Got it. Fair enough. So on that note of opportunity and the Darwinian theory, let's just bring the black swan into the conversation, right? Which is the pandemic situation that we're all dealing with right now, right? And honestly, we don't know when the vaccine will come, when the cure will come, whether we can travel again or not. But one thing which is probably absolutely certain, and based on our conversations with customers across the board, I think a lot of companies are going to prioritize digital transformation initiatives, either to look at cost savings or to also think of newer adjacent sort of revenue streams to keep marching forward, right? So Milan, the question to you, right? Has the pandemic situation done any good to the automation industry? And if you look at companies pre-pandemic, enterprise customers of yours pre-pandemic who had already embarked the automation journey, did you find them to be in a better position to bring resilience as part of the response to pandemic, or you were surprised in terms of the lack of ability for companies to respond to this kind of a black swan kind of an event? What's really going on around pandemic situation with automation? It'll be good to understand your point of view.
So I think, Praveen, I think all of us know this. It's been 3 or 4 odd months, and if you really reflect on our own personal point of view, I think we all have quickly adapted using digital modes, digital media to continue to work whatever we do, whichever business and area we are in. And I think if you look at enterprise as a living organism, it's a very similar behavior enterprises have displayed, where they chose digital mediums like ours to do that. So I think that's clearly across industries. One of my favorite stories is in the public sector in India, but that probably applies to all public sector anywhere in the world. The public sector companies always believed in physical, and what we have seen in last few months is the speed at which they are thinking of augmenting that physical thing, physical infrastructure, physical processes with the digital part. So I mean, if a public sector and government can change, I think the private sector, large enterprises will move at a much faster speed.
What would be a good example of that, Milan?
So I think the good example is that this is the some of the oil marketing companies, the public sector banks, they always automated a point area. So you had something which was automated, however, a lot of surrounding processes which were still physical or semi-automated in nature. And today, with the restrictions we all face, day-to-day life, I think that has fundamentally changed. And one more point I would like to highlight, Praveen, just to expanding that theme which you touched on. What we have found is that any crisis essentially throws one very interesting result. That the stronger becomes stronger and weaker sometimes stays weaker unless they take a very strong set of steps towards that. And what we are noticing is that industry after industry, the organizations which had a very strong digital backbone were able to service better, able to manage revenue better, able to service a variety of not just the revenue needs, but even the cost-related aspects. So that's clearly which has come out, and automation plays that core role. And then the final piece is, when I look at India as we believe that India-based global centers have played an exemplary role, and I think almost hundreds of them are our customers. What has happened is that it has further positioned India as that scalable, resilient, and failure-safe kind of a environment where, in a very short period, 90 to 95% of the capacity was being delivered. Unfortunately, some of the other locations across the world did not have that level of play. So that, I think, has played a huge role in automation adoption, not just in India, but even global companies are registering that, hey, we were running automation out of our India centers. Our operations ran anywhere in the world seamlessly, and I think that has been noted in the senior most executives across the Fortune 500 companies.
Right. So one quick question before I turn to Sandeep. In terms of the innovation on use cases, right? Because crisis is the mother of invention, as some people say. Did you, in your customer base, observe any interesting use cases around the pandemic situation that you want to talk about?
So that, I think the two which was very unique to this situation. So as everybody was working from home, suddenly the help desks across all companies had a at a very high workload, and what we were forced by our customers to, we did not have it earlier, but we created a WFH bots, everything from monitoring employee productivity, monitoring the system of the employees, and anticipating troubles ahead of time. And employees were using devices which were not company provided devices. So you also had to do provisioning of applications, access on your home desktop, on your iPad, and so on and so forth. So I think that was the one unique, I would say, the aspect. The second aspect which came was the call center space, where suddenly, call center or contact center employees could not visit, but they had to continue doing the, doing the access. And one very interesting thing happened, Praveen, is that when you are operating in a physical premise, you can control privacy. You can hide the credit card data. You're not allowed to take a mobile phone or a camera or something. But when employees are working from home, they still have to do the same transaction without touching that. So then again, we were pushed hard, and we came out with a solution where we could do a masking of the data even when you're working from home. So those are the two, I would say, very unique situations which came because of pandemic, and we built bots around those.
So on the on-premise one, and pardon my ignorance, but if some company were to deploy RPA today, would you need people like ITC Infotech to visit their offices on-prem and deploy it, or they can do it completely remotely right now?
Not at all. In fact, not at all. Praveen, I think one of the other things which I I'd like to mention is the adoption on cloud. Our platform is available on cloud. And now earlier the customers used to say that they will start on-premise and slowly they'll migrate to cloud. Now it's completely moving to cloud, and which means that the companies like ITC and Sandeep's organization can do it from anywhere in the world. So your configuration, deployment, and your product enhancement, bug fixing, all of that can be done remotely. So that's another big piece where automation can be deployed at speed remotely because it's operating on a cloud cloud native platform.
Got it. So Sandeep, what are your customers telling you? Are they accelerating the automation initiatives during pandemic, or they are decelerating it right now?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a mixed bag, right? Let me put it that way. And I say it's a mixed bag because of two reasons. First reason really being that, see, wherever people are trying to think about creating large strategic automation-led transformation initiatives, I think there's a holdback, there's a pause, right? Very clear. We are seeing that. On the other hand, most of the requirements really seem to be about how do I really get certain bots into play that helps me manage my current reality, right? And if I take an example of one of our retail customers based in Europe, right? Obviously, as one would anticipate, a lot of the traffic has moved to the digital channels, right? So the amount of, let's say, load that is hitting the customer service function, the website, those are really going up, right? And going up tremendously. So what these guys are really looking for is really bot intervention, which allows them to manage this temporal spike of volume and activity, right? And I think that's very important because I think that's the way I think people have started looking at automation in terms of resiliency as well, right? So if I have a certain temporary spike in a certain area or a function, can I really manage it using a bot as opposed to doing it with a larger system concept and things like that, which obviously takes much longer. And I think I completely agree with Milan's point. I also kind of referred to that earlier. So companies which basically have already invested in, let's say, automation COEs, I think their ability to really come out, develop these bots very quickly, or use a partner like us, or use a partner in this particular space to really get that going very quickly, a turnaround of 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, right? I think that kind of, let's say, capability has really defined, I think, most of the companies which have probably come out of this particular situation still looking fairly good, right, in some sense. So I think it's really a mixed bag. Now, I think in terms of our companies strategically looking at automation as a lever, and I mean, is there a, let's say, maybe a 3 month, 6 month, 12 month view that they're trying to establish? I think we definitely see a lot more interest in that area, right? So I don't think these transformational initiatives will happen now, But it looks like there's a lot of, let's say, discussion that is happening in terms of how do we really start scaling up my automation infrastructure, right? In a very, very structured fashion. What we're also seeing is, customers who used to basically go through that three-step process, let's prove, then pilot, then expand and scale, right? Are now wanting to basically crash the first two pieces very quickly and then move to the third one. But start that in a more incremental, Lego block kind of, model, if you may, right? As opposed to, can I really create a large vision strategy, get everybody together and then move it forward? I think there's certain nuances of that nature which seem to be kind of people.
So we are getting, while you were speaking, Sandeep, there was one audience question that came, and I'll probably blend my next question with the audience question. I think the crux of the question is, how do we really identify the right use cases, right? Even in pre-pandemic time, getting to that right use case was always a trickier problem to solve. And in pandemic, when the budgets are always constrained, people and companies really want to focus on things that matter the most, right? When I was talking about the four-pronged approach or four-block approach of automation, you could really go on either direction, right? You could go left to right, where you start with use case discovery and eventually make a decision on the tool, or you could actually come the other side, where you start your decision process with the tool, and then sequentially discover use cases that you can deliver on that particular tool. What is your recommendation to people who are not yet decided on the right approach? Is there even a right approach in the first place, Sandeep, based on your experience with the customer so far? And then, what would you like people to follow as a best practice?
So I think, Praveen, assuming that question was for me or was it for Sandeep?
Well, I would like to get a response from you as well, Milan, but I think the question was to Sandeep. I'll come to you in a moment.
Okay. All right. So I think, see, one always has to probably look at it from a customer perspective, right? Because every customer has a slightly different appetite in terms of how they really want to run this. But I think, if you really look at how people seem to be evolving this as they go, right? One thing that is kind of kicking in very quickly is that the use cases have to basically deliver value, right? Which are understood and which is measurable, right? In some sense. Now, value, I mean, if I go back to my earlier conversation, right, that I started off the agenda with today, I think what we are finding is that conversations are actually veering towards not only about can I really drive a lot of efficiency, productivity, and hence cost savings, but also around experience. Can I really try and basically improve the experience of a certain function in terms of people and so on and so forth? And the conversations are also going down the path of, does it really make my entire process more robust? So, for example, some customers that we talk to, they actually come back and talk about the fact that, all this is good, right? All this automation is good, but does it really allow me to become more proactive, right? Does it allow me to basically do a sense and respond faster to certain situations that may be happening in our manufacturing shop floor, in our retail stores, in our, let's say, in our product management areas, right? And so on and so forth. So the conversations are kind of getting driven by, where is it that I can actually drive more value in terms of not only efficiency and cost savings, but also in terms of making the processes more robust and stronger as well. And I think the last piece of, this entire puzzle seems to be now the realization that there are certain processes which also give you a lot more resiliency, right? And I will take a very specific example coming from our own company, right? So whenever you basically run into this kind of pandemic situation, what tends to happen is that BCP plans tend to get drawn up, right? And the first thing that you do is, okay, let's try and create this BCP center, right? And this BCP center obviously is very different from the BCP centers of the past, right? The BCP centers of the past were really about disaster recovery and things like that from an IT services perspective. This one is really about business continuity. This one is really about, how do I really make sure that my workforce, which is doing a secure work from home, is as productive as what they used to be earlier. So coming back to the BCP model, I think the BCP model today is allowing many of us to go back and re-examine as to what is critical from a data reporting, decision-making perspective. And I think if you don't have the right kind of automation infrastructure to run that, your ability to really respond quickly across your entire distributed employee base, your customer base, right? It tends to go down a little bit, right? So I think the other aspect to also bring in is this entire aspect of how do I really use resiliency as a way of, as a lens to figure out that these use cases are really use cases that I should push forward on. Right? So I think it's an interesting mix, right? I think the perspectives obviously differ, but ultimately it's always about, is it creating value, whether it's from resiliency, effectiveness, efficiency, or what have you, right? And those use case discovery really needs to be driven by that.
Think of all of your customers, Sandeep, the 100% of your customers, and a lot of them are putting together the critical response teams and BCP plan. What is the percentage of companies who are prioritizing automation as part of it? Just a broad ballpark number would do.
So I mean, I don't think there's an analysis that we have done which give me a certain number that way. But I would suspect that 3 out of every 10 customers that we are talking to are actually very, very curious in terms of what can automation do in the context of this situation. So I think that is really coming out as a very strong, let's say, conversation form.
And a very 30-40% companies are doing that. Okay. So Milan, your point of view, you've been advising companies for 20 years on different technologies and automation more recently. Are you walking the talk, and what's the right approach in terms of the use case first or a tools first kind of approach? I know you have a vested interest in saying tools first, but I want you to wear your consultant hat and give us a pragmatic view of what's really reasonable for companies to go after.
Yeah, I think the use case led model is basically it's very constraining, because you are basically asking whoever, whether Automation Anywhere or any other company, you have done it earlier, then only I can do it. And to me, that is not the right way to transform or change anything. I think probably the approach, in my view, would be the end goal in mind. And the end goal is ability to save time, improve compliance, minimize the error rates, etc. Then you look at multiple tools and say that can RPA be that solution? Can ERP itself can have a native automation, or can you do something with with some Python-based code? And then you look at the next stage and say that what is the fastest? What makes it? Certain places will prefer technology-led solution because they have a very strong team, internal teams. But where many of the organizations do not have a very strong development team, hence you go to a packaged software like ours. So that's one part. The second part, I think I've always observed is that it's not either or. So bots are not saying that okay, bots will do this, hence human won't do this. I think there is this huge opportunity with bots, and I think ITC is probably the best example we typically quote in India, where they've given this idea of bot buddies, where bots can work with humans, augment a certain set of capabilities and areas, and either give them more time to give better customer experience, give them more time to engage, listen, and interact more. So I think that's the other aspect of use case. And the final use case we typically find is that whichever technology you use, I mean, it'll be great if you use Automation Anywhere, but even if you don't use Automation Anywhere, the reality is that there is a tremendous unstructured and semi-structured data which is sitting in the organization. And when you look at organizations and their people's time being spent on that, I think those are the obvious use cases. So you don't have to have a ready package solution. You can just simply say that, hey, I want to fix these problems, unstructured and semi-structured data problem. I want to augment the human capability, and I want to automate with the minimum effort without my technical skill sets. That gives you a plethora of use cases. I think, yes, you can always take the safer approach. If somebody else has done it, I will do it. But, well, basically then you're leaving your thinking to somebody. What if they've not thought about that use case? Then you will never touch that at all.
So I'm just reflecting on one of the audience questions that is probably related to this, right? So the question really is that in the pandemic situation, most of the automation decisions are being made by the finance office, the operations office, and so on. And therefore, a lot of horizontal use cases are getting prioritized. How should one think of vertical use case? And this came from someone who represents chemical, materials, and pharma industry. So how should, in general, right, how should companies think of vertical specific use cases, and are there some type of organizational structure constructs that will enable vertical use cases to come in the forefront of it?
I think that's a great question, because most of the folks find that the finance, HR, procurement are the easiest, and they are relatively easier because it's a very well standardized process. But the real opportunity lies in manufacturing, on sales and distribution, because that's where there is the return and the benefit is so visible compared to some of the enabling functions. The method which we typically recommend is going to the basics. And what is the basic? The basic is it a rule-driven task? Is it interacting with multiple systems? And finally, are you dealing with semi-structured or unstructured data? If answer to even two or one is yes, then there is an opportunity for you to do an automation feasibility on that process, whether it sits in shop floor writing reports, or whether it sits in plant maintenance doing maintenance requests, or you are in sales and distribution, engaging with your secondary, tertiary distributors and so on. So I think that's the play, and the best governing methods we have found is a combination of business and technology. So IT team provides the tool, IT team provides the infrastructure, the underlying infrastructure, especially if you're running it on cloud, etc. And the business team identifies the use case, and then you create this quote unquote techno-functional resources or business analysts who understand automation tool as well as understand the business area. They are the best bridge for you to accelerate and adopt RPA or similar technologies in a fastest possible manner.
So Sandeep, in your customer base, are you seeing some sort of friction between the techno-functional team? IT team doesn't want to work with a business, and business team wants to make their own decision. We've heard comments from business teams that they almost want to swipe their own credit cards and buy Automation Anywhere platform and get started. Is that what's happening, or what Milan is saying is where things are headed?
Yeah, I think when you look at it, I think this is probably a consequence of how RP has evolved over a period of time, in some sense, and probably also to the earlier question that you had, Praveen, a little bit of a commentary on that from as well. See, look, when you look at, let's say, RPA, I think I completely agree with Milan's point in terms of the kind of, let's say, rules that you want to really look at to try and identify candidate processes from an automation perspective. But I think RPA has always been associated with this entire element of strategic cost reduction that I called out earlier, and hence it has found its root in largely shared service organizations, right? And shared services which are either run by you as an enterprise or by some service provider on your behalf, right? Now, where do the shared services lie? They typically lie in the BPO world, right? In the finance, HR, procurement kind of functions, or they lie in the IT operations part of it, right? In terms of shared services around help desk services or application support. And hence, those are the easy candidates, right? To really look at it, where the line of sight from a buyer perspective is very clear in terms of who's really buying it, right? However, I think where I think this is moving to, and I think I'm seeing a few more discussions now move towards in that direction, is how do I really stream everything in automation, right, across the enterprise? And for me to do so, right, I need to basically obviously have a very strong IT, let's say, infrastructure set up, right, in terms of tools, technology, infrastructure, security, people, right, ultimately. And two, I also need to basically be able to have a very strong business partnering, such that pretty much I run this with not only function A or B, but I run with pretty much all functions. So today, one of the challenges that we have in RPA, I think, if I was to take a very quick stab at this, is that RPA seems to have basically grown in a very functional way, right? It's IT, it's finance, it's HR, and there's fragmentation in terms of who's running it. So it is not uncommon to see a company which has probably 3 different RPA setups, right? Servicing a certain line of business or a certain function. I think if you have to basically think about, like what Milan said, if ultimately the enterprise goal is really in terms of bringing down the cost, reducing the errors, improving the agility and the turnaround of the enterprise on various dimensions. then you really need to start thinking about that enterprise concept, right? Where you actually have a very strong, let's say, automation setup, which is of course a complement of the business and the IT teams, where the role splits are very clear, right, in terms of who's doing what and how you really stay with it. Uh, I think it's something that has just about started happening, right? Praveen, in my opinion. So I think we are witnessing, I think, potentially the start of companies moving from a very functional kind of view on automation to an enterprise view of automation. That's the way I would put it.
Got it. So, Milan, I'm getting two questions, and I'll try and give it a little bit of a twist. So, if you look at this one professor I've been reading on, his name is Peter Diamandis. He's part of Singularity University. He has written a book called Bold, where he talked about exponential technologies, and automation, of course, is one of the exponential technologies he calls out very prominently, right? One of the messages he says is for any exponential technology to succeed, some degree of isolation. He calls it skunk work. Some degree of isolation in terms of the way you execute on it is very important, right? So, in your experience with your customers, are companies making automation isolation projects so that they can not get stuck in the bureaucracy of the enterprise but continue to make progress? Borderline is probably a COE approach, but I don't know if there are certain trends you can highlight in terms of how companies are approaching the automation initiative per se.
Well, I think the answer to that is that it's a little bit conflicting, because any successful technology, you want that to be viral within the company, and you want more and more functions, more and more countries to get benefited by that. So while the first 20, 30, 50 bots should be run by defining all the guidelines, the COE, which you touched on that term, where you define the protocols, you define the methods, governance, the expected ROI, and so on. But after that, I think the real benefit organization can only get is when it becomes viral, and every part of the organization, we use the word citizen developers, and when the citizen starts developing bots and building productivity, I think that's where the real benefit comes in. I would say that the early phase, generally recommended that you build a center of excellence and get some of these policies, methods in place. The playbook, that's the word I think you've used in this session. You get the playbook in place, and after the playbook has been finalized with the right inputs, right guidance, then you can really do a controlled expansion, a controlled explosion actually, to get the maximum benefit. See, one of the reasons. Just
5 minutes ಬಂದೆ.
We can keep the word if we are not speaking.
Just the one small comment I'll make is that, Praveen, is that if you really think about why RPA over enterprise-wide system also is speed. Now, if you slow it down by isolation, if you say that you have to submit an application, somebody will approve it, I think then it mimics the reason why this technology came into play. The real what we always say, and why in this entire pandemic this really took off in a big way, is speed. You can deploy a bot in 7 days, 10 days, 20 days, and can gives you that technology enhancement which otherwise would take a longer time. So I think I'm in favor of isolation, if I may say, in the early stages, and then with the right playbook being defined, and then you do a controlled explosion.
Got it. And one of the other questions that's coming in is how real is cognitive automation? Is this really scaling, or automation continues to be stuck at the manual, mundane, straightforward process level jobs?
I think what's happening now is that it is after the easy ones. See, any organization will always start with a low-hanging fruit, and that's where the earlier comment we made, that it will go to shared services, finance, HR, because those are the easy ones, visible. And as they expand, one of my favorite example is that we work with one of the semiconductor companies where at the fab level they are able to minimize the cycle rates, the errors which they do on testing, which is a very complex process. So I think today now we are seeing that it is no longer manual. It is getting a lot more manual and repetitive process. It is now getting into that quote unquote semi-structured, unstructured data, and also this entire aspect of augmenting the human play. So it's becoming a lot more. Is it truly AI scale? I don't think so. It is still a few years away, where a lot of AI capabilities will be built in, and a lot of judgments will happen. But it has definitely moved from the basic RPA to what we call it as the more integrated and end-to-end RPA today.
Got it. I think we're running out of time, but Sandeep, I just want to ask you one last question in terms of your final recommendation to people who are still on the fence with respect to automation initiatives. Should they get started, and what's the right way to get going in this world?
I think what we have found working always is that there is no longer a business case needed. If you go and say that I want to digitize, I want to give a better speed to market, I think more than ever there is a willingness in the boardrooms, in the CFO's office, or in the COO's office of finding ways to digitize it. I think my immediate recommendation, given the pandemic is here with us for at least foreseeable future, is that automate your critical processes, which which has such a high human dependency, because that will truly impact your revenue or your core function. And then start small. Start with 10, 15, 20 bots max in a period of 3 to 4 months. And once you see the early results, then and at the same time, while you're doing that, also engage in players like the right implementation partners to build those right playbooks that will allow you to then reap the benefits later. So I would say both. Don't hesitate, jump in, because this is the time the stronger will become stronger and the weaker will stay weaker.
Sandeep, your quick comments?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, I think one has to commit to automation, right? I think to me, the days of trying to run that three-step process that I mentioned earlier, in terms of pilot, prove, and then expand. I think if companies go down the path of taking 12 months to basically get to a point where they're able to achieve a certain throughput on bots, right? Then I think there's a certain, let's say, there's a certain competitive disadvantage that they're carrying with them. I think one has to basically go in and say that, hey, look, automation is something that is here to stay, right? And if it is here to stay, and if the conviction is there, that it is there, and I think what I also see is that from a boardroom perspective, I think this question on automation being mainstream is obviously something that comes in more as a directive, more as an aspiration sometimes. So I think the timing is absolutely right for us to just go in and say, oh, this is something we need to do, right? And we need to basically get onto that journey fast. And there will be a few areas where you may fail, right? But at the end of the day, I think you have to start rolling this forward, rolling it fast. So I mean, my input to any customer organization would be that I don't think we should really keep thinking, right, on a use case basis as to are you getting enough business value out of it and things like that. I think that particular notion, I think, has been proven again and again and again in many cases. Again, based on the research that you guys have done, Praveen, right? It very clearly suggests that people who started the journey around 4 years back or 5 years back are the guys who really are moving on to a more sophisticated tool set, are getting into more complex use cases. The business value recovery is a lot higher and faster, right? From a strategic cost reduction, if that is the primary objective that people are chasing, then to try and say that, I will squeeze out 2% of, let's say, cost through automation for you to work on that. You need to have got onto the journey maybe 3 years back, right? To be able to really do this. So again, my point to this is I think we just need to go in full out, embrace it, and then move forward this way.
So one final question, maybe a tricky one, right? So are you committing to work on outcomes with your customer because you're so confident of the technology, Sandeep?
See, I think when you look at, let's say, automation, one thing that one has to keep in mind, right, is that the value reporting part of automation has always been traditionally very weak, right? Unless until it is related to FTE reduction, right, and the shared services context. So I think we need to be able to create the right kind of value reporting methods which allow you to go back with a certain conviction to the leaders of the company and say that, hey, look, I've been able to deliver so much of cost savings, so much of experience linked savings, right, and so on and so forth. So I think that is the piece that I think really needs to be worked on. I think.
So Milan, your point of view, you agree, disagree?
I think outcome, yes, if there is a absolute and executive ownership and support, where automation is going to be way of life, and where this is truly to be allowed to achieve an organizational objective, yes. If it is tactical, if it is, then you don't want, whether it's us or any system integration partner, will never commit to it. Like any, skin in the game comes in where, everybody loses, including the organization which is hiring the agency also loses. Then I'm sure that, various companies and various partners have taken that model. So I would say yes. And I think, frankly, I feel that given the environment, it is even the chances of getting that executive ownership and commitment is a lot higher now than probably it was pre-pandemic.
Got it. On that note, I think we are at the top of the hour. So thank you so much, both Milan and Sandeep. This was a really interesting conversation. I can tell the audience that we did not prep on these questions at all. So these were impromptu questions. So what you heard as responses were true responses. They are not game responses, but very interesting insights. Thank you so much, both of you. And over to you, Nikhil, for the closing note for the session.
Thank you, Praveen. Thank you, Milan. Thank you, Sandeep, for joining. And thank you, everybody else who joined us in today. And hope you found some insights and some key takeaways from the session. For me, it was very interesting to hear about the different approaches for automation, the use case approach versus the tools approach, and how traditionally automation, while has been restricted to the finance, HR operations, now it has a big opportunity to scale up to the other main business functions as well. Also, we spoke about the approach towards automation in case you're not yet started, how you should have to commit to it to a longer term rather than trying to take a pilot approach and wait in terms of tactical approaches. So yeah, thank you everyone again for joining. In case you have any questions, I know we couldn't answer all the questions. In case you have any questions, you can send it to us offline, either to Prashant or me, and we can try and answer as much as we can in the coming days. I look forward to you joining us for the upcoming sessions as well. Thank you so much, everybody.